Went no contact for 2 years. Then my parents showed up with my betrayer to steal my cabin. I'm a 28-year-old man. For the last 2 years, I've lived completely on my own. No contact with my parents, no visits, no calls. It wasn't always like this. Before everything fell apart, my parents and I used to be close. But that changed when my oldest friend Tyler betrayed me. And my parents decided he was worth keeping around more than I was. Tyler and I had known each other since we were 5. We grew up on the same street, rode the same bikes, went to the same schools, and for a long time, people joked that we were brothers. My parents adored him. Even when we got older, they'd talk about how polite and ambitious he was, how I should learn from him. It was annoying, but I never thought much of it until college when things turned ugly. The betrayal came out of nowhere. Tyler had gotten close to my college girlfriend behind my back. Nothing physical at first, but he shared private things I'd told him in confidence, twisting them until she thought I'd been lying to her. By the time I found out, she had already broken up with me, and Tyler was telling everyone that I'd brought it on myself. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, saying I was too sensitive. That was the last time I spoke to him. My parents didn't see it the same way. They called it a misunderstanding and kept inviting Tyler to family dinners. They told me I was being dramatic, that I'd regret throwing away years of friendship. The more I tried to explain, the more they defended him. Eventually, I stopped trying. When I told them I didn't want him in my life anymore, they said I was being ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. That was the breaking point. I packed my things and moved out within the month. For 2 years, I built a quiet life of my own. I found a steady job as a systems technician at a small firm, rented a modest apartment near the edge of town, and learned to enjoy the silence. My phone stayed quiet, my boundaries stayed firm, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have to justify my choices. That peace ended one Saturday morning. It was around 9 o'clock when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't the delivery guy. I hadn't ordered anything. When I checked the peephole, I froze. My parents were standing outside, and next to them, holding something in his hands, was Tyler. I didn't open the door right away. I thought maybe if I waited, they'd leave. But the knocking got louder, more insistent. My father's voice carried through the wood, calm but commanding, the same tone he used when I was a kid. I finally opened the door just enough to see their faces. My father looked serious, my mother anxious, and Tyler, he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. My father started talking as if nothing had happened, telling me it was time to stop acting like a child. My mother stepped closer, hands clasped like she was about to pray, saying something about forgiveness and family. Tyler stayed silent, still clutching that small wooden box. I told them they shouldn't have come. I reminded them I'd made it clear 2 years ago that I wanted no contact. My mother's eyes darted to Tyler, then back to me, and she blurted out why they were really there. They said they wouldn't finalize the family property transfer, my late grandfather's lakeside cabin, unless I agreed to make peace with Tyler. That caught me off guard. The cabin wasn't even theirs. It was part of my grandfather's will. I hadn't asked them to manage anything. I'd assumed the paperwork was routine. Apparently, they'd been holding it as leverage, waiting for a reason to dangle it over my head. I told them that wasn't how this worked, that my grandfather left the cabin to me, not them. My father's expression hardened. He muttered something about how I'd regret burning bridges. My mother looked like she was about to cry, mumbling that she couldn't pass away in peace knowing her son was still angry. Then Tyler stepped forward, opening the box. Inside were old photos. Us as kids, fishing at the lake, laughing in front of the cabin. My mother said they'd put it together to remind me of better times. I didn't touch it. I just told them to leave before I called the police. They didn't move at first. My father's jaw clenched, but eventually he turned away. My mother followed, whispering something to Tyler before walking down the hall. Tyler hesitated, standing at my doorstep for a few seconds longer. He said something about not knowing what my parents planned, that he just wanted to make things right. But I knew this wasn't his idea of making peace. It was another manipulation. When the door closed, I locked every bolt and stood there in silence, listening to their footsteps fade down the corridor. The box sat on the floor outside for a long time before someone else must have taken it. That day, I decided to call a lawyer. If they were willing to use the cabin to force me back into their version of family, I wasn't giving them another chance. The inheritance was my grandfather's last gift to me, and I wasn't about to let anyone use it as a leash again. The moment the door shut behind them, I knew it wasn't over. My parents never made empty threats, especially when control was involved. The cabin wasn't just a piece of property. It was the last thing my grandfather left me before he passed. He'd made it clear that it was mine alone. Still, my parents had handled the paperwork after his death, and I hadn't questioned it then. I hadn't imagined they'd ever use it as leverage to drag me back into their drama. Later that afternoon, I checked my email and saw a message from the family's longtime attorney. It was short but strange. He mentioned that my parents had requested an update on the transfer status, and he wanted my confirmation before proceeding. That told me they still had access to something they shouldn't. I didn't reply. Instead, I called my own lawyer, a man named Carson, who'd helped me set boundaries when I first went no contact. When I explained what happened, Carson didn't sound surprised. He asked me to forward any messages, texts, or documents they'd mentioned, especially if they had inserted themselves into the inheritance process. I spent the next hour digging through old emails and scanned files, realizing my parents had been quietly CC'd on correspondence with the estate office from the very beginning. By evening, I gathered everything. Email chains, the attorney's letter, even a copy of my grandfather's will showing my parents had no legal authority. Carson told me to prepare for them to stall the process. He said we'd file a claim to transfer ownership directly under my name and request a cease and desist order if they tried to interfere again. The next day, a hand-delivered envelope was left outside my apartment. Inside was a photocopy of a form labeled Management Dispute Pending. My parents had officially filed a notice disputing the transfer of the cabin, claiming they were protecting family assets from misuse. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was a full attempt to block my rights. If you think what these parents did is completely wrong, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments. Would you have opened the door or kept it shut? Let me know. Before I could even process that, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Tyler. The message said he wanted to talk privately, that he hadn't known about the property situation and didn't want me to think he was involved. I deleted the text without replying. He'd lost the right to talk to me years ago, and I wasn't reopening that door. An hour later, my apartment buzzer went off. I didn't answer, but when I checked the hallway camera feed, there they were again, my parents standing side by side, and Tyler a few steps behind. My mother was holding that same wooden box. They stood there for several minutes, knocking, waiting, before leaving it by my door. When they finally walked away, I opened it just to see what they'd done this time. Inside were photos of me and Tyler as kids, a few of us at the cabin, and a small note that said, "Family should forgive before time runs out." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. It was my mother's handwriting. I put everything back inside and set the box aside as evidence. That night, I sat at my desk documenting everything. I took photos of the envelope, the note, the delivery time from my security camera feed, and compiled it all into a folder labeled Property Case. I uploaded copies to a private drive just in case anything happened to my laptop. Carson called me the next morning with a plan. He would draft an immediate motion to transfer ownership through the estate court, bypassing my parents entirely. He'd also include a notice warning them against further interference. He told me to expect pushback, possibly even attempts to contact me again, but that every step they took would only strengthen the case against them. By the end of the day, all the paperwork was signed and scanned. I blocked every known number connected to them, updated my address information at the courthouse, and changed my locks just to be safe. When the last email was sent, I sat back and let the silence fill the apartment. I wasn't celebrating or relieved, just focused. My parents had made their choice the second they weaponized my grandfather's memory. Now, it was all going through legal channels. No more visits, no more boxes, no more pretending any of this was about family. A few weeks later, Carson called with confirmation of what we had suspected. My parents had officially filed a management dispute over the cabin title. The estate office had frozen the transfer until the matter was legally resolved. It essentially locked my inheritance in limbo. It was a petty move, but a smart one. They couldn't win ownership, but they could waste my time. Carson drafted a cease and desist notice that afternoon. It laid out everything clearly. They had no authority, no legal rights, and no reason to interfere. He sent copies to their attorney in the estate court, and he told me to prepare for the next step, a court hearing if they didn't back off. 2 days later, the first letter appeared at my door. It wasn't in an envelope, just folded paper with my mother's handwriting on the front. The message inside started off gentle, calling me her only son, then quickly turned into guilt. She wrote about how life is short and that forgiveness heals all wounds. The last line mentioned Tyler by name, saying I should give him a second chance. I didn't respond. I never gave my new address to anyone in my family, so the fact that she found it meant she'd gone digging through public property records or estate paperwork, maybe through old records, maybe through the estate paperwork. Either way, I knew it wouldn't stop at one letter. By the end of the week, there were 4 more. Each one alternated between emotional pleading and subtle threats. One mentioned my father's health. Another accused me of turning my back on family, and one even claimed Tyler had been hurt by my stubbornness. I stored every letter in a folder and installed a small camera above my apartment door, angled at the hallway. A few days after setting up the camera, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. It was Tyler. He wrote that he wanted to clear the air privately, that he wasn't working with my parents, and that this whole thing had gone too far. I didn't believe a word of it. The last time I agreed to a private talk, I ended up ambushed in a coffee shop with both of my parents waiting at the next table. I forwarded the email straight to Carson, who told me to leave it at that. At work, things started getting strange. During lunch, a coworker who knew my parents from church mentioned that they'd been telling people about a family reconciliation project. Apparently, the story going around was that I'd become unstable since moving out, and that my parents were trying to help me get back on track. It was calculated, just enough of a lie to sound like concern. I went straight to HR and explained what was happening. They made a note in my file, flagged my parents' names in the call system, and promised to forward any contact attempts to me in writing. A week later, HR confirmed someone had called pretending to be a family member, asking to verify my employment. They caught it because the caller slipped and used my middle name, something only my family would know. That incident went straight into the legal folder. That night, when I came home, there was another envelope under my door. No return address, no name. Inside was a printed photo of me and Tyler as kids sitting on the dock at the cabin. On the back, in the same handwriting from before, it said, "Don't let memories pass away for pride." I checked the camera footage and saw my mother leaving it an hour before I got home. She looked straight into the lens before walking away, almost daring me to confront her. I sent the footage to Carson, who said it was enough to prove continued harassment. He also suggested I update my mailing address across every official channel so my parents couldn't access it again. The next morning, I went to the police station and filed an official harassment report. I brought copies of the letters, photos, and timestamps from the camera footage. The officer listened carefully and said they'd add it to the system in case the situation escalated further. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore. My parents had crossed from manipulation into obsession, and I wanted everything documented from that point on. Nothing was going to be handled quietly anymore. This time, it was all going through the proper channels. The police followed up on my harassment report a few weeks later. A local officer came by to verify details and review the camera footage. He watched the clip of my parents leaving the last envelope at my door and nodded slowly, saying the repeated visits could qualify as stalking under local law. He made copies of everything and said the department would escalate it if they tried to contact me again. Carson moved fast. Within a few days, he filed an injunction against my parents, blocking them from making any changes to the cabin's title or trying to contact me directly. It was the first official step that legally put distance between us. I thought that might slow things down, but it only made them push harder. 3 days later, my manager called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable and said there had been a voicemail left on the company line from my parents. They claimed I was mentally unfit to handle property matters and needed supervision. My manager had saved the message and sent it to HR before telling me. HR documented the incident and gave me a written copy of the report, which I forwarded to Carson. He said it was perfect proof for a defamation claim. Not even a week after that, I got a certified letter from my parents' attorney. It was written like an olive branch, suggesting family mediation to resolve emotional misunderstandings. Carson read through it and immediately told me not to respond. He said it was a setup. Once I agreed to private mediation, they could twist it into a false reconciliation attempt. He sent a reply through legal channels instead, stating that any contact must happen under court supervision only. A day later, their attorney sent another letter with a statement from my father. It claimed they only wanted their son back and were heartbroken that legal action had come between family. It sounded caring on paper, but Carson pointed out that manipulative people often hide control behind emotional language. He added it to the harassment file. While that was happening, Tyler decided to join the chaos. He started posting old photos of us on social media, school projects, camping trips, even one at the cabin. He used new accounts and mutual friends to tag me indirectly, even though I had already blocked him. Friends started messaging me asking what was going on. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to Carson, who said this linked Tyler directly to my parents' ongoing harassment. Then a mutual acquaintance reached out saying Tyler had been telling people he was trying to save me from myself. That line had my parents' tone all over it. I immediately ended that friendship and asked Carson to issue a formal notice through email that all communication with me must go through legal channels only. That way, if anyone tried to mediate, it would count as contact. A few nights later, my neighbor knocked on my door. He told me there had been an older couple sitting in a silver sedan across the street from the building for over an hour. They left as soon as he walked by, but he managed to get part of the license plate. It matched my father's car. I didn't even bother confronting them. I sent the information to Carson, who said this was exactly why he'd filed the injunction. That week, I decided to upgrade my security system. I installed new cameras covering every angle of the entryway, hallway, and parking lot. Each camera had motion alerts and automatic cloud storage. 2 nights later, around midnight, one of the alerts went off. I opened the app and saw my parents again, standing outside my door. My mother bent down and slid another envelope through the gap before they both turned and walked away. I didn't touch the envelope. I just filmed it from every angle before dropping it, sealed, into a bag for evidence. Carson submitted the footage to the police first thing the next morning. By the afternoon, the department confirmed they were drafting paperwork for a formal restraining order. For the first time, there was an actual line that my parents couldn't legally cross. And this time, if they did, it wouldn't just be a family dispute. It would be a criminal violation. The court date for the restraining order hearing came faster than expected. Carson told me to gather everything: letters, emails, voicemails, screenshots, even timestamps for my camera system. I organized every file into a digital folder and printed hard copies for court. By the time I was done, a pile of evidence filled an entire binder. A few days before the hearing, an envelope arrived from my late grandfather's estate attorney. The letter inside was brief but important. It confirmed that the cabin transfer had been written to bypass my parents completely. It will explicitly stated that they were not to have any management authority over the property. The attorney even attached documentation showing that my parents' management dispute filing had no legal basis at all. Carson reviewed it immediately and smiled for the first time since the case began. He said, "This letter turns turned the situation from a property dispute into a fraudulent interference claim. By blocking the transfer, my parents had knowingly tampered with legal documents. He filed a new civil claim for damages the same afternoon, attaching the estate attorney's letter as proof. The next morning, I walked out of work to find Tyler leaning against a car in the parking lot. I hadn't seen him in person since the day my parents showed up at my door. He started walking toward me with his hands raised like he was trying to calm things down, saying he wanted to fix things before court. I didn't say a word. I went back inside, called building security, and reported the incident. They escorted him off the property, and I filed another police report before the day ended. Carson added the report to the growing harassment record. The timing made sense. My parents' dispute had collapsed, and now they were using Tyler to get information or provoke a reaction before the hearing. It was the same manipulation cycle, just through a different person. When the hearing day arrived, Carson and I met early at the courthouse. He reviewed the binder one last time before we went in. Inside, my parents sat together at the defense table, pretending not to look at me. Tyler wasn't listed as a participant yet, but his name came up several times during questioning. Carson presented the footage, letters, and call logs one by one. He showed proof of each violation of contact, from the doorstep visits to the letters and voicemails left at my workplace. The judge listened quietly, flipping through pages of evidence before turning to my parents' attorney. Their defense was weak. They called the visits family attempts at reconciliation. The judge wasn't convinced. By the end of the session, he granted a 60-day temporary restraining order while reviewing whether it should become permanent after the civil hearing. 2 days later, I found out my father had sent a mass email to nearly every relative we had. The message accused me of being influenced by outsiders and turning against family for money. He copied distant cousins, old friends, even a few of my coworkers' parents who knew our family from town. The goal was clear: to make me look unstable before the full case began. That evening, my aunt called. She apologized for what my parents were doing and said she would testify if the court needed someone to confirm the long history of manipulation. I passed her name along to Carson, who said it could help solidify the harassment timeline. He also reminded me not to respond publicly to anything they spread. Keeping quiet would make their behavior look even more unhinged when compared to my restraint. Meanwhile, Tyler resurfaced online. A few people sent me screenshots of a photo he posted, an old picture of us edited to include a fake caption implying I had apologized and wanted to rebuild. The post picked up quick attention, spreading to relatives and mutual friends. Carson immediately contacted the hosting platform, filing a takedown demand for defamation. Within 2 days, every post and tag disappeared. After that, Carson decided it was time to tie everything together. He filed a formal motion to add Tyler as a named defendant in the ongoing harassment and interference case. It meant that from now on, all three of them, my parents and Tyler, were officially bound by the same legal restrictions. That week marked a turning point. The restraining order was active, the fraud claim was filed, and the harassment case had expanded. Every move they made from that point on wasn't just family drama. It was evidence in a courtroom. Once the restraining order went into effect, things quieted down for about a week. I focused on work, made sure my security system was running smoothly, and kept documenting everything for court. Tyler's name now officially appeared beside my parents in the case file, linking all three of them to the same harassment record. For the first time, the law recognized what I'd been dealing with for years: a coordinated effort to control and manipulate me. The silence didn't last. My parents hired a new attorney, one far more aggressive than the last. Within days, Carson received a motion to dismiss the restraining order, labeling the entire case as a family misunderstanding exaggerated by legal interference. The claim argued that my parents were acting out of love and that my distance had caused emotional distress. Carson responded immediately, attaching the estate attorney's letter that proved they had deliberately tampered with the cabin's transfer process. The judge denied their motion within 48 hours. News of the case started spreading through extended family. I began getting messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Most were distant and cautious, but one stood out: a cousin named Brooke, who apologized for believing my parents' version of events. She said they had told everyone I'd abandoned the family for money. Carson advised me to save the message. It proved my parents had been spreading defamatory claims beyond their direct contact. Then the workplace interference started again. My HR department called me in after receiving a phone call from someone claiming to be a concerned family member checking on my well-being. The caller described me as unstable and under heavy stress. They recognized my mother's voice halfway through the call. HR flagged the number, documented it as harassment, and gave me a printed record for Carson to submit to the court. Around the same time, Tyler resurfaced. This time, he began messaging people from my past, old classmates, co-workers, and even a few family friends, warning them that I was planning to sue everyone who ever crossed me. One of those acquaintances, who I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me screenshots of the messages. The pattern was obvious. Tyler was trying to turn people against me publicly while my parents kept attacking me through legal and social routes. Carson filed a motion to merge all of it, every act of interference, defamation, and manipulation into a single comprehensive injunction. It would consolidate my parents and Tyler under one coordinated harassment case, so none of them could shift blame to another. The judge reviewed the filings, saw the consistent timeline of overlapping actions, and approved it. From that point forward, every move any of them made would count as a joint violation. Not long after, Tyler's attorney sent a letter proposing what he called a private resolution meeting. He wrote that Tyler was emotionally exhausted and wanted to move on peacefully. Carson didn't even consider it. He replied that there would be no private contact of any kind due to repeated manipulation attempts. Every exchange would stay within the courtroom. A week later, another envelope showed up, this time from my apartment's management office. Inside was a copy of a complaint letter mailed by my parents. They described me as hostile toward family, mentally unstable, and potentially disruptive to neighbors. They even claimed I had been refusing wellness checks. It was a clear attempt to get me evicted. Thankfully, my property manager already knew about the ongoing legal case. He didn't act on the letter. Instead, he sent it directly to Carson with a short note saying, "Thought you'd want this for your file." That small act protected my housing and added another piece of proof to the harassment pattern. By the end of the week, Carson and I sat in his office surrounded by stacks of labeled binders: property fraud, defamation, stalking, interference, and emotional harassment. The restraining order eventually stopped them from showing up, but they were still trying to reach me in every indirect way possible. The case was no longer about the cabin or even the inheritance. It had become about exposing the years of coercion, manipulation, and control that my parents and Tyler had hidden behind the word family. The next court session wouldn't be about temporary orders or paperwork delays. It would be the full trial, and for the first time, everything they'd done was about to be brought into the open. The full hearing began on a rainy Monday morning. All three cases, harassment, property interference, and defamation, had been officially merged into one. The courtroom was packed with people from both sides of the family, most of them there out of curiosity. My lawyer, Carson, set down 3 thick binders on the table in front of us. Each one was labeled with a single word: evidence. As proceedings started, Carson laid out the timeline of events. Every letter, voicemail, and online post was presented in chronological order. Screenshots showed the coordinated attempts from my parents and Tyler, the doorstep visits, the letters, and the social media tags. Each document had been verified and timestamped. The room stayed silent except for the sound of pages turning as the judge reviewed the material. When it was the defense's turn, my parents' new attorney tried to reframe everything. He argued that they had only acted out of love and that the restraining order was a misunderstanding between emotionally distressed family members. He claimed my parents had been motivated by concern rather than malice. Carson stood and pointed out that concern doesn't involve following someone, blocking property transfers, or contacting employers to spread lies. The judge looked at my parents over his glasses and reminded the defense that repeated unwanted contact was harassment regardless of intent. He warned them not to minimize the pattern of behavior. That single statement shifted the atmosphere of the entire courtroom. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand and described the day my parents showed up at my apartment with Tyler. I recounted how they brought a box of childhood photos and demanded reconciliation before they would release my inheritance. Carson asked how many times they had violated no-contact boundaries since then, and I listed every documented incident. Each one was backed by camera footage or official reports. And it was Tyler's turn. His lawyer tried to paint him as a bystander who had been used by my parents. They argued he had only wanted to mend an old friendship. Carson waited until they finished before projecting screenshots on the screen behind us. Messages from Tyler coordinating the timing of visits, agreeing to bring certain items, and discussing how to get me to open the door. Tyler's face went pale. Carson then introduced something new: financial records obtained through discovery. They showed my parents had intentionally delayed the cabin's transfer while sending contradictory updates to the estate office. The documents proved they knew they had no legal rights, but used their management role to hold it hostage. The judge called for a brief recess and returned 15 minutes later with a ruling. He ordered a temporary freeze on all their joint assets until the case concluded, preventing them from hiding or moving funds. Across the courtroom, my parents whispered hurriedly to their attorney while Tyler stared down at his lap, avoiding eye contact completely. The tension was thick enough to silence the room. When the session ended, I stepped outside and saw my aunt waiting near the courthouse steps. She handed me a sealed envelope from my grandfather's original estate attorney. She explained that it had been found while reviewing archived files. Inside were 3 letters, one from my grandfather, one from the attorney, and one from my parents. The letters revealed that years before his death, my parents had tried to have me removed from the will, arguing that the cabin would be wasted on me. My grandfather refused and ordered the property to go directly into my name, bypassing them entirely. Carson reviewed the documents the next morning and said it changed everything. He immediately began drafting an amendment to add inheritance fraud to the existing case. The letters were the missing piece, proving intent and long-term deceit. Before Before the next session, Tyler's attorney reached out again. He offered a private settlement. Tyler would issue a public apology and cut ties with my parents if we dropped charges against him. Carson showed me the email, but I didn't need to think about it. We declined. There would be no backroom deals or partial truths this time. The next phase was set. The case would move forward with every accusation, fraud, harassment, and defamation on record. The judge would hear it all, and for the first time, the truth would be made public. The second phase of the court hearings began on a Tuesday morning, this time focusing on the inheritance fraud and emotional harassment claims. The courtroom was packed again, and this time a few reporters had taken seats in the back after the filings became public record. Carson opened with the new evidence, the letters from my grandfather's estate attorney and the original correspondence proving that my parents had tried to alter parts of the will years before his death. When the letters were read aloud, the room went completely silent. The first one was from my grandfather to his attorney, confirming that he wanted the cabin left directly to me. The second was from my parents, sent weeks later, asking if there was a way to update the beneficiary list to include Tyler as a backup recipient. The final one was from the attorney to my grandfather, warning him that someone had attempted to forge my signature on a secondary document. That forged document had been caught before submission, but the handwriting was eerily close to my father's. The judge authorized a handwriting analysis during that session. A few weeks later, the results confirmed what everyone already suspected. Both of my parents had contributed to the forgery attempt. My father's handwriting matched the signature, and my mother's notes appeared in the margins of the same draft. Carson presented the report as part of the fraud claim, and the judge added it to the criminal review file. Next came the discovery of financial records. The court clerk read through Tyler's communication logs and found bank transactions from my father to Tyler during the same period when my parents had been pushing reconciliation. The payments were labeled as consulting fees. When Carson asked what exactly Tyler had been consulting on, no one had an answer. Tyler's lawyer requested a short recess. When the court resumed, Tyler took the stand again. This time, under oath, he admitted that my father had been paying him to convince me to reconcile and to help repair the family's image before the property transfer. The judge leaned forward and asked if he understood that taking payment to influence someone involved in an active legal matter could be considered tampering. Tyler nodded, clearly shaken. The courtroom erupted in whispers until the judge called for order. My parents sat frozen as the judge reminded them that manipulating witnesses and forging documents could result in criminal charges beyond civil penalties. Their attorney tried to reframe the payments as family support, claiming Tyler had been struggling financially and they were simply helping him out. The judge didn't buy it. He ordered a full financial review of all accounts linked to my parents and Tyler for the past 5 years. Then my aunt was called to testify. She told the court that years earlier, both my parents had bragged about making sure the cabin stayed in the right hands, referring to Tyler or themselves. She explained how my grandfather had confronted them about it before cutting off access to the estate paperwork. Her testimony aligned perfectly with the letters Carson had presented, solidifying the fraud claim beyond question. As testimony continued, Tyler's demeanor completely fell apart. He broke down on the stand, saying he never meant for things to go this far and that he just wanted the family back together. The judge reminded him that choices have consequences and ordered him to return to his seat. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting for comment. I walked past them quietly. Later that evening, Carson called to tell me that my parents' assets had been temporarily seized pending the investigation into the fraudulent filings. The freeze included their joint bank accounts and property holdings, ensuring they couldn't move or hide money during the trial. The next day, their attorney sent a formal letter offering to settle. They wanted me to withdraw the emotional distress and defamation claims in exchange for an immediate transfer of the cabin and an apology letter. Carson read it aloud and then shredded it. We weren't negotiating anymore. I told Carson I didn't care about their money. I wanted the full truth on record and the case decided in court. The next week, the judge officially scheduled the final hearing date. It would determine permanent ownership of the cabin, finalize the restraining orders, and issue the judgment on damages. After years of being controlled and manipulated, it was finally coming down to one last session. And this time, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The final court date took place on a Friday morning. The courthouse parking lot was fuller than usual, with a few local reporters and several extended family members waiting near the steps. Most had come out of curiosity, but some were there to finally see how everything ended. Carson met me at the entrance carrying a small briefcase. He didn't bring the full stack of binders this time. Everything important had already been entered into evidence. Inside, the courtroom was quiet but tense. My parents sat together on one side, Tyler a few seats behind them. Carson began his closing argument by laying out the full story from start to finish. He described the years of control, the constant interference disguised as reconciliation, and the coordinated harassment that followed. Every visit, every forged document, every rumor was accounted for. He called it what it was, a campaign of manipulation dressed up as family concern. When he finished, the judge sat back for a long moment moment before speaking. He started with the inheritance issue, confirming that the cabin was legally and solely mine. The will had been clear, and every attempt by my parents to interfere or alter it had been unlawful. He ordered the property to be transferred directly to my name through the estate office, bypassing them completely. The court clerk recorded the decision immediately. Next came the harassment and defamation rulings. The judge granted a permanent restraining order against my parents and Tyler, prohibiting any contact or third-party communication. They were not allowed to reach me through family, co-workers, or mutual acquaintances. Any attempt would count as a violation. Tyler was fined for harassment and for providing false statements during earlier hearings. My parents were ordered to pay damages for defamation, obstruction, and emotional interference. The total amount wasn't small, but it wasn't about money. It was about accountability. Before finalizing the verdict, the judge addressed them directly. He said, "Family love is not a license for control." His voice was calm but firm, echoing through the room. "You cannot claim good intentions while violating another person's autonomy. The court will not reward manipulation disguised as care." After the ruling, Carson guided me through the next steps. We filed the deed transfer paperwork that same afternoon, sending it directly to the estate office for processing. Without my parents' signatures or oversight, the property was finally secure. The court's decision was binding, immediate, and final. By the next week, news of the verdict had spread through town. A few local papers published short summaries of the case, focusing on the inheritance fraud rather than the personal details. My name cleared quickly after that. People who had avoided me for months started reaching out to apologize for believing my parents' version of events. The gossip died off almost overnight. Tyler disappeared from public view soon after. His social media accounts were deleted one by one, though before he vanished completely, one final post circulated, a short message that read, "To those I hurt by being loyal to the wrong people, I'm sorry." It didn't name anyone, but everyone understood who it was about. My parents tried to appeal the restraining order 2 weeks later, claiming the punishment was too harsh. The appeal was denied without review. The judge's written statement said there was clear, repeated, and escalating disregard for boundaries, and that lifting the restriction would place the victim at continued risk of harassment. That denial made the restraining order permanent. My aunt called soon after to congratulate me. She said the family had always known something was wrong, but hadn't realized how deep it went. She told me she was proud that I'd chosen truth over manipulation, even when it meant standing alone. I thanked her, and that was the last conversation I had about the case. When all the paperwork was complete, I drove out to the cabin for the first time in years. The road was quiet, lined with pine trees that hadn't changed since I was a kid. The house looked exactly the same, untouched, peaceful, still mine. Inside, on the mantel above the fireplace, was one of my grandfather's old letters framed behind glass. It said, "Independence is the only gift that cannot be taken away if you guard it well." I locked up after walking through every room and stood outside for a while, listening to nothing but the sound of the wind through the trees. When I drove back home, the silence in my car felt different. Final, not empty. My phone didn't ring. No letters waited at my door, and no one tried to reach me again. After years of interference and noise, quiet meant something new. It meant freedom.